TVR TV, Richmond, Virginia, Channel 6.
This is Nightbeat, with anchor reporters Charles Fishburne and Lisa LaFanta, meteorologist Mike Wonkum, and Ivan Schwartz with Scoreboard Plus.
Good evening, I'm Lisa LaFanta.
And I'm Charles Fishburne. Thanks for joining us.
At least 2 people have been killed in a clash between the Soviet military and pro-democracy protesters. Witnesses say protesters were trying to halt an armored column and were hurling gasoline bombs at tanks when the soldiers opened fire. There are reports of deaths in other skirmishes, including that of a Western journalist, but none has been confirmed. Throughout this evening, as a curfew was in effect, tanks rolled through the streets of Moscow. Russian President Boris Yeltsin, who has taken refuge in the Parliament building, told Western leaders that he feared a takeover of his building was imminent, but he does continue to hold on. There are no reports in from the Russian republics on military activity or any possible resistance. CBS News will have an update beginning at midnight when it is 7 a.m. in the Soviet Union. Charlie?
The new U.S. ambassador to Moscow is on his way to the Soviet Union to assess the situation. President Bush today swore in Robert Strauss during a ceremony at the White House. Although Strauss is not expected to meet with new takeover governments, he will find out as much as he can from the U.S. Embassy.
So I'm asking him to go over there, get the lay of the land, establish what will be strong leadership. The embassy, we've got a good team in place, but this man is in charge of this important mission. And then to return within the next several days to give me a full personal report on what he sees there.
The new ambassador has also been asked to find out as much as he can on the whereabouts of Mikhail Gorbachev. Earlier today, Soviet officials said Gorbachev is being held by force at his vacation home in Crimea.
And the Tappahannock family's trip to the Soviet Union has obviously turned into more than they bargained for as they find themselves in the middle of a possible civil war. But as Nightbeat reporter Jay Ariano reports, the family plans to stay, watch, and learn until they are scheduled to come home.
For Margaret, David, and Ben Broad, it was supposed to be a trip to the Soviet Union to further the peace between the U.S. and the USSR. Margaret, the head mistress at St. Margaret's School in Tappahannock, left for the USSR on August 7th with her family. They are there to take part in an exchange program for doctors and educators. Woody Price is the assistant headmaster at the school. Price is not alarmed by the recent turmoil in the Soviet Union, and he also says he is not worried about the Broads' safety.
We're very fortunate that it's not a situation like the Tiananmen Square situation in China where there really was the jamming of satellite communications and jamming of television communication, where we really would be worried about their safety.
Just as Price was showing his concern over the lack of communication with the Broads, word came that they were safe and sound in the city of Moscow.
That Margaret and the groups they're all with the Russian families. They're all very, very calm. The American embassy is being very cooperative and very helpful, and they said if the people want to get out, they will help them get out as much as they can.
The news of the Broads' safety was good news to their neighbor, the Reverend Jim Peterson, who is also the acting chaplain at St. Margaret's.
She must be disturbed by the recent developments, but they're very resourceful folks. They're going to be fine.
In less than 2 weeks, 120 students will return to this picturesque campus. And if their headmistress hasn't returned by then, faculty members say they will do the best they can. And when Mrs. Broad finally does return, she will have some interesting stories to tell her pupils about Soviet life. In Tappahannock, I'm Jay Ariano on the Nightbeat.
The Broads spent the first week of their trip attending conferences outside the city of Moscow. They moved in with their host family last Sunday, and Charlie, they say they will be returning home this Sunday as scheduled.
As scheduled, business as usual, maybe. Right. Well, many people are wondering just how events in the Soviet Union are affecting the economy. Business, not much, according to...
They were in Moscow when the attempted coup took place. Ed McLaughlin has their story.
Margaret Broad, her husband David, and their 14-year-old son were as close to history as an American tourist could get. They were in Moscow when tanks rumbled through the streets.
I reached for my family, and we tried to stay very close together. My husband is very adventuresome, so he reached for his camera.
Just a week after the Soviet world turned upside down, Margaret Broad sits in her office looking at the photographs of the coup that almost was. A moment, she says, which will forever define the old order.
The country lives under socialism, and yet for a period of 48 hours, it was communism at its harshest. And that was really dramatic. It's something that in our society we can't even begin to imagine. The concept of no information, none.
The Broad's 14-year-old son, Ben, who took his skateboard with him, says it was pretty boring until the failed coup. He says there was nothing to do except sit around and look at museums.
Seeing the tanks made it more exciting. And there was lots of people. It looked like there was going to be a big fight or something, but nothing happened.
I take it the trip was not your idea.
Oh, no, not at all.
This cartoon from the Times of London sums up the Broad's trip to Moscow. In the weeks and months ahead, as Margaret Broad surveys the campus of St. Margaret's, she will be telling her students about an unforgettable moment. History, she says, really has changed because the Soviet people have changed.
They really don't want to go back to this way of life, and that, you know, it would be better to die than to go back to the way of life that would be proposed for them under the communist regime.
Ed McLaughlin, Channel 12 News.
St. Margaret's is a 71-year-old private girls' school in Tappahannock, and when the 120 students, grades 8 through 12, return, they will hear firsthand an exciting story.
The conflict between Yugoslavian republics appears to have...
As Mike Corbin reports, the family is back and has learned a lesson that they will never forget.
Americans were not used to having tanks in our streets.
Margaret Broad and her family have vivid memories of their 2-week stay in the Soviet Union. For her, husband David and son Ben, a conference on education quickly turned into a living history lesson when the coup attempt broke their very first day in Moscow.
You didn't know how safe you were. You didn't know if the tanks would turn onto the crowds or if they would just stay where they were.
If it hadn't seemed like a party at that time, it could have gotten really bad. And, I mean, there were like thousands of people there. I mean, it was packed, too. You couldn't barely move there.
Broad, head mistress of St. Margaret's School, is relieved to be back home amid the serenity of Tappahannock. Son Ben goes skateboarding with friends just as before. But having experienced what some are calling the beginning of the end of communist rule and the rise of a new leader, she still fears for the family she and loved ones stayed with. Information there can be easily blacked out. Structures are in disrepair. Life, she says, is generally difficult for the people there. But remembering those recent larger-than-life moments, she hails the spirit of the people, which she believes will help hammer out their destiny. For now, Broad is focusing on her own destiny.
Would you go back?
I would go back professionally, I think. Personally, it would certainly not be at the top of my list.
In Tappahannock, Mike Corbin, WTVR, News 6.
Broad says a 14-year-old Soviet girl named Marcia served as their interpreter during the trip. They do hope to have her in Tappahannock for a visit soon.
And coming up for you on the 6 p.m. report, everybody's looking forward to Labor Day. Mike Wonkum says the weather's going to be great.
All right, you need to hear the forecast in Virginia. Power says dig deeper. Your monthly bills are increasing again.